However, something magical happened for me when I became unapologetic about the fact that I'm a strategist and that that's the kind of work that I want to do. I started saying no, and I started figuring out, which is probably how I got to you today, figuring out how to communicate exactly the value I bring, the kinds of clients that are uniquely situated to receive that value, the kind of companies that I want to work with. And that's when the magic happened.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella Williamson.
Hello, and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella Williamson. This season, our focus is on evolving your career. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer R. Hudson, APR. Jennifer is a strategic communications advocate, trainer, mentor, consultant, and speaker. Her superpowers are helping PR leaders step boldly into their role as a trusted advisor and weeding through the details to ensure an organization's communications are always focused on the big picture. During her 25-year career in corporate communications, Jennifer has always sought to broaden the role of public relations. She leads trainings and workshops on corporate messaging, strategic communications planning, and core values, vision, and mission. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hey, Melissa, thank you so much.
I'm so excited to finally meet you and talk with you. Tell us a little bit more about your background and your work today.
Yeah, I've just admired you on LinkedIn for so long, and
Thank you.
I was very happy to have seen one of your podcasts with another guest, and I was like, that woman's amazing. You remember that I shared it on LinkedIn. I was like, she's very cool. I started my career in public relations almost by happenstance in a way, very similar to you. When I was in college and after graduation, I felt a bit lost. I had an internship at Univision in Dallas, and I was so hopeful that they would offer me a job, but they didn't at the end of it. And I remember that I was turning 21, and my mother at the time, there was no Obamacare or that kind of thing. My mom's like, you got to get a job because you're going to be 21. You're not going to be on my insurance anymore. And I didn't remember this until about a year ago when my mother reminded me, but we met this gentleman at an event who mentioned that American Airlines was hiring Spanish-speaking reservations agents. And my undergraduate degree had been in Spanish. I'd lived in Mexico and Spain and wanted to, no matter what I did with a career, I wanted to be able to use Spanish. So I went into college pre-law and shifted because I fell so in love with the language to Spanish and communications. And graduated with a Spanish degree because my school was way too expensive for me to spend another year trying to get the communications double major when they didn't offer all the courses that I needed by the end of my senior year. So American Airlines was hiring Spanish-speaking reservations agents, and I had made it through 4 years of college without even knowing how to type quickly. And I trained myself to type and managed to get that job. And this is where things began to get interesting. So in the Spanish reservations department, we had a communications department as well. We had a video production team of one, and I pitched myself to work with the video production team. Ended up writing, directing, producing a training video about the Spanish reservations department for the reservations organization. Ended up writing a newsletter for the Spanish reservations department. Ended up being promoted into a management training program that also allowed me to be a part of a communications team for reorganization. And I think that this is important because the topic for your fall series on career exploration, I think that it's important for people in whatever role they're in currently to try to plant themselves in what they love with the opportunity that they have at the moment. And I wanted to make sure that I always kept my hands in some way in communications. To bring this story to somewhat of a close, as I decided, okay, I'm having a great time at American Airlines, and I know that I can excel in on this management track that I'm on. But I really wanted to get back to some area of communications. And I had done research and discovered this field of public relations, which I decided could really marry all the things that I loved, working with media, speaking Spanish, international travel, like all of it. I decided that I would apply to grad school, and then decided, okay, it's time for me to leave America. Even though I've had a great run here, it's time for me to kind of get on with my life. And right as I made that decision, American Airlines opened a position in corporate communications, and I was ecstatic, applied for and got that job. And that started my professional career in corporate communications. And since that time, I've moved from American Airlines to Sabre, the travel technology arm of AMR, to British Airways, to now working on my own. And that was sort of precipitated by 9/11. After 9/11, the airline industry went bust, and I ended up taking a severance package with British Airways and was pregnant with my son at the time, and decided that, a lot of life decisions, a lot of work decisions are impacted by life changes. And I decided that I was going to stay home with my son, but I always wanted to keep my hands involved in the field of communications. And so reached out to contacts that I had in previous jobs and started working on my own. But that's a bit about how my career evolved. I didn't jump immediately into the practice of public relations. I don't even think it was offered as a major where I went to school. I focused on communications and Spanish, and sort of planned it and fell into it after I discovered it.
Well, I think what's smart, and I'm seeing from what you're saying here, Jennifer, is that we're introspective enough to look at the dots and connect them and say, well, I know I want this to be a part of my work life, right? The Spanish language and the communication part. But then that communication became that through line from your career, and saying, well, I'm really good at this, and this is natural to me. I think that's always a good signal for us that, hey, green light here is that you are naturally gifted in this area. How can you intersect that with a job or career path that's sustainable? That's something that I talk to a lot of students about. In fact, I have a very creative daughter. I'm a very creative person. That's how I lent myself into this career. Painting, photography, poetry, all the P's, and then PR, right?
Yeah.
But again, all of those by itself, at the time, I didn't feel confident that I could make an easy living doing that, particularly being first generation college graduate who went to a private university because they were intimidated by a large public. So financially, that was in some ways a mistake. But there's so much to learn from. And like you said, I think if you are thoughtful and can make time to actually zoom out and look at your career and decide, is this the path I want to be going down? Is there another road or lane for me? Or like you, do I have to create one? And I think that's what's really inspiring about your career evolution, is that it does sound like it's a little bit of that serendipity, but then also intentionality.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The evolution of my career. When I got into grad school, I learned that public relations was way more than what I was doing in the corporate communications department at American Airlines. While today I preach about the importance of connecting with all the different departments in the organization and practicing inclusive communications and listening to the diverse voices behind the brand, I didn't realize I was consciously doing that, that I was actively doing that while I was at American Airlines, where I was interacting with marketing, with sales, with customer service. But in our department, while we had communications practitioners who were responsible for certain departments, we did it primarily for media relations. And when I got into grad school and I realized that public relations is this management function that's all about mutually beneficial relationships, like it rocked my world. And I was never the same. I was never going to be boxed in again to just pitching media stories. I recognized that the employee communications piece was something I was really passionate about. And when I saw the breadth and the depth of what we are capable of as communicators and what the field actually offers, like I was just, it changed me forever. And so as a communications consultant, one of the most important things for me is to help. I work with nonprofits and small to mid-sized businesses, and I really want to help them professionalize their communications, to match their communications activities to business goals, not just do, media because they feel they should be doing it, but really looking at whether or not we actually have an internal communications issue that we need to address before we start looking at take care of the inside, take care of the house first.
Always, always.
Right,
An
right.
ongoing challenge, Jennifer. And I felt like it was unique in my career too, is having done employee communication and DEI work inside of an organization. You start from the in out. And then, as you know, with inclusive communication or DEI or any time you're trying to be respectful of people, well, you have to start from the individual and then move into groups. Because if we as practitioners have problems communicating and how we respect or work with people, then that's a big part of our problem that we need to work through too. So yeah, I love that you said that.
Yeah. And I also find that in the last few years, like I've always talked about the importance of staying in contact. It's that environmental scanning we should always be doing as PR professionals, right? I've always felt that it was important to, I used to say that I'm always all up in the business of everybody in the organization, because if I know as much as I can about what's happening in the company, I'm a better advisor. I make better recommendations. I make more creative decisions. I can take advantage of greater opportunities. And so I just think it's important for us as communicators not to develop our initiatives, our activities in a vacuum. We will do it by ourselves if we're consultants, or with a team, or with department leaders, or with the CEO. But because of the way that I've worked in the past, always needing to connect with different people in different departments, I've seen how that's enriched even the stories that I've told about the company, about organizations.
Yeah, that's really, really important. I'm always trying to counsel that for me to be of any help, you have to be honest, right? I have to know what the real problem is. And quite frankly, sometimes the clients don't know what the real issue is. And there are many times that part of that counsel, even if we're okay, put together a great communication campaign on this, or, we want media coverage, whatnot. The questions that I ask definitely starts peeling back those onion layers, and it's not always comfortable. And that's why I say that I feel like my spirit animal in some ways, or my signature Disney character is Pinocchio. I mean, it's not Pinocchio, it's Jiminy Cricket. I'm always watching out for Pinocchio. What are you up to? Because as that conscience, we can't be that real guide if we don't know where our Pinocchios are or what they're up to. And a lot of times the mistakes that people make, and most of the mistakes that we deal with in PR, are human made, right? Because we make mistakes, is ignorance. And then, in the best of scenarios, we've had that opportunity to educate the clients, and they make the right choice with that information and knowledge and do better. But there are times where you have to step back or step aside and walk away. That's, I think, a gift being a business owner in PR, is that you're able to say, if you won't take good advice, if you're not going to do the right thing, I'm not going down on your ship. Right. Not my personal integrity and brand. So I think that's really important.
Ethically, it's incumbent upon us to make those decisions. I love that you talked about the questions and the due diligence. Like I've had clients get annoyed with me because I ask so many questions initially, and it's the best way to really understand all the different aspects of the business. And you've got to talk to multiple people. So that, and I think when we approach our work with curiosity, we naturally ask those questions. I hear so many so many CEOs who are frustrated that they're not getting what they would like from the PR pros that they're working with. And I think when we approach our work with a level of just curiosity, like I genuinely want to know as much as I can about my clients, as much information as I can. I ask tons of questions. I had one client, it was an architectural firm, and I discovered that the people who worked in the firm had all these beautiful creative activities that they were doing outside of the firm. And if I hadn't been asking all these questions, what books do you like if I hadn't been digging that deeply into their backgrounds apart from their work life, I would have never had those stories that I could pitch when, quite frankly, they weren't ready to talk about some of the projects that they were working on. So those human interest stories made that possible. And that's from media relations. That's not even, the other aspects of our work, which is community and employee communications and crisis and issues management. And so I love that you asked those questions. The curiosity, I think, is really critical. And I talk about that a lot, like approaching our work with a great deal of curiosity and asking the questions.
Yeah. And I think some courage and care, I would add to that too, because one is that you have to be brave enough and self-confident enough to say, I'm going to ask you the hard questions. That is my role. That is the best investment you can make in me is that I can be that advisor, which means we're going to have to talk about the hard truths and let's just fix things that are a challenge and move through them, right? But then also caring enough to go that step, Jennifer, because I can't tell you, I see it, I hear it every day. It doesn't matter if it's at the local level, national, global. A pro has to actually care to go there, because a lot of times people just say yes and they take the task and they do it. They bill, they move on. Employees do that. They're afraid to say something. I've literally seen where a building would catch on fire and people are like frozen because, well, one, shock, but two, what am I allowed to do? Right? What am I supposed to do as an employee sometimes? Right. And even as a business owner, there's huge consequences for us, obviously, right? Making the wrong move, but that's where that courage and care and remembering, well, if we're in public relations, we should be thinking about people first. And so I just want to highlight that too, is that I sense that from you, is that you have to actually care about the client and the work you're doing to even step into that space. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Anais Miracle, a proud supporter of the Smart Talk series. As a sponsor, I would like to share a few organizations I support, and they include Southwest Key Programs, the Hispanic Women's Network of Texas, Fierce Mujeres, and the Hispanic Public Relations Association, HPRA, the Texas chapter. Please find out more information about these organizations in the show notes. And thank you to Melissa Vela Williamson, a steadfast leader in the space of Hispanic public relations and public relations overall. And thank you for all that you do for Latinas like myself in public relations.
I wanted to take us a little bit deeper into your business, because I will say, and speaking about courage, it's not every day that you see people leave a corporate job. I was in that space and I talk about that in my book, and making decisions, like you said, when life changes on you. And sometimes work changes on you, quite frankly. And it doesn't fit the kind of life you want to live as a whole or healthy person or whatever that might be, right? And I think it's really smart of you to be thoughtful about how you move your career with your life. So tell us more about when you made that leap and became your own business owner. How did you even decide? Because being a business owner is a whole other level of busy, I think, as you know. But then you intersect that with PR work. It's like, oh my gosh. So how did you decide what services to offer inside Think Beyond Public Relations? And has that changed over time for you?
Yeah, I definitely started my business wanting to focus on strategic communications and wanting to help companies match their communications activities to business goals. Like that was the given. The reality of business, though, the reality of business is often quite different. People come to you, we want to get media coverage, we want to be in the news media. And I remember the frustration I felt because we've got this beautiful framework available to us as PR pros. If you have your APR, I know you're familiar with RPI. We have this beautiful framework that, by the way, allows us to ask the kinds of questions that we were talking about earlier. There's a process for that, and that's in the research phase where you're asking the questions and where you're digging deeply into the organization to understand them. And so I wanted to take this framework. When I was in grad school, we called it the RACE formula, right? It's evolved. Research, planning, implementation, evaluation, those 4 phases are just beautiful. And when we take advantage of those frameworks, we close gaps, we find all kinds of opportunities with companies. So I wanted to focus on that work. The reality of being a business owner and getting clients to the level that I was a process. They wanted one thing, I would dig in with my questions and knew they needed something else. And it created a bit of a disconnect, but when you need the work, you do the work. That's the reality of it. However, something magical happened for me when I became unapologetic about the fact that I'm a strategist and that that's the kind of work that I want to do. I started saying no, and I started figuring out, which is probably how I got to you today, figuring out how to communicate exactly the value I bring, the kinds of clients that are uniquely situated to receive that value, the kind of companies that I want to work with. And that's when the magic happened. So focusing on strategic communications, I started networking with a very dear friend of mine who had worked with me at American Airlines, Pat San Pedro, and I learned so much from Pat. She had gone out on her own. And I remember just being in awe of her because we would go into client meetings and she, at one, she was like, I don't know if I should, Pat wouldn't mind. I don't think that I say this, but this was years ago at the time. She was like, I'm just not going to work for any less than $5,000. That's just it, and I go in and she was just fully who she was. And I looked up to her so much as a mentor, as a woman business owner. She was fully who she was. And I realized that's impacted a way that a lot of who I am today. And it sort of naturally happens as you get older as a business owner as well. You show up the way you show up. You're much more confident in the value you bring. And you've had a number of successes behind you, which adds to that confidence. And you lean into, as I have, into frameworks because I've seen how powerful they are. And so leaning into RPI, developing my own signature messaging framework that I now teach to PR pros. I love this process because it's all questioning and working with the diverse voices behind the brand to really work with you to create the messaging for an organization. How do we talk about ourselves? It's based on 5, simple questions. It goes deeper into the workshop, but it's who are we? What do we do? Who are we serving? Why are we unique? Why should anyone care? And using that framework, a strategic communications planning framework, what I discovered doing some of the messaging workshops over my career was that there's a part of that session where we talk about core values. And when you talked earlier about employees not knowing what they should say or whether they should speak up, I tie all of that back to core values and how an organization is communicating and living out those core values. When I discovered in those sessions that folks in many cases didn't even know what the core values of their organizations were, and were certainly not living them out in tangible ways, I developed a framework to help them do that as well. So what are our core values? How are they showing up for me individually? How are they showing up in my department? How are we living them out as an organization? Are we matching systems and policy and budget to those core values? My focus initially on strategic communications led me to messaging, led me to core values, and I've sort of wrapped all of that up into the work I do as a communicator, both consulting with clients and teaching it now to public relations professionals.
Yeah, I love the teaching aspect of it. I very much feel called to that, and I think it's incredibly soul satisfying. But to your point that you've been working to broaden the perception of PR your whole career, as you learned about it without having that academic track, right? And in some ways, that academic track does have like lane boundaries, and I see that from academics, and that's part of why I wrote my book, was to kind of bridge the gap between what students were, or in a lot of cases like mine and yours, not learning about PR in college, but then what was happening in practice could be quite different. And then you add different workplace cultures, workforce dynamics, where different countries are at and how they're treating people. just changed the game a whole lot. And I think that, to your point, with strategic communication, it has to have that kind of depth and framework. And what I've seen too, and you'd mentioned earlier that sometimes we want to do things as business owners or even as pros, and that's not exactly what's in demand at the time. And I give you a lot of respect for saying this is what you should be asking for, because I know the big lift that is. I've had a couple times where clients were like, oh, yes, we want a strategic communication plan, run your system, listen, and MVW team, and we'll follow along and we'll understand that that'll be a wonderful guidebook for the campaign, right? And I've even got to that point where we finished up the plan and we're like presenting and walking through the plan. And I've had a couple clients go, yeah, but like, where's my media coverage? And you're like, but you signed off on this. You knew this was the process and the framework, why we're making these intentional steps forward so that we could ask all the curious questions to get amazing story angles and ideas and know what you need to be doing to complement this work in advertising, or, where your website usage or user experience and copies off and whatnot. And it's like they didn't have the tolerance to wait for that greater good. They wanted just a lot of noise right away. And so in terms of media relations with that, Jennifer, like, are you asked for that service a lot, or what kind of coaching or training are you asked most about these days?
Yeah, I don't get asked to do a lot of media relations. And I should say that early in my career and early in your career, you are doing media well, the media landscape is changing so much, but the pitching and news release writing and connecting with reporters. And I was actually really good at it. I've worked with journalists all around the world. I know what makes a good news story. My master's degree is journalism with a focus on public relations. I actually had the academic while I was actively practicing, which was beautiful. I was able to see that what I was practicing could be enhanced by what I was learning in school. So it was wonderful. I typically get asked to support people with a couple of different things. Younger folks and people earlier and mid stages in their career looking for mentoring, a sounding board. If they have recently moved up a level or want to move up a level in their career, they're looking for a sounding board on managing communications for their companies or their organizations. And then I get asked to do the workshops that I facilitate for companies, the messaging sessions, developing strategic communications plans, the core values, vision, and mission work. And I attribute that to just getting clearer as a consultant and as a human being about what I want to do and how I want to show up in the world and the impact that I want to make. I think that focusing on what brings me joy and what I know adds value is what allows me to make the impact. And so I talk about that stuff, and that's what I'm drawing in. And that was not always the case. But yeah, I love mentoring, especially college students and people in their mid-level careers. I'm actually a mentor with a few different organizations here in South Florida, a certified mentor with a venture mentoring team. And I work with startup founders and business owners. But the PR folks, students who are studying public relations, they reach out to me on LinkedIn and contact me. And I actually don't have I want to know if they can hire me to mentor them. I actually don't have a service for that, which probably means there's a business opportunity out there.
Yeah,
somewhere.
there is.
There is. There's probably a business opportunity out there somewhere. But my mentoring is done through the programs that I offer. So in the strategic messaging program, there's a mentoring component. But I just love providing that kind of support and advice. So that's, those are the kinds of things I get asked about.
Yeah, I totally understand. And that was part of why I wrote the book. During the pandemic, I was really frightened. Everyone was frightened, right? But I was really frightened. Well, if something happened to me, all this hard work, and I learned all these lessons the hard way, I wouldn't be able to pass on first to my children. So at least I know, well, they have some profession that they know about and could consider, as well as my husband's, of course. And then, of course, to all these different pros, particularly professionals of color or students who have not heard about PR or considered it, or journalists who are transitioning. It was like, how could you mentor all these people? And I thought, well, I could scale, right, those conversations or tips or the frameworks that you mentioned. I could put that in writing and leave that behind. So I'm glad that I was empowered and felt I could do it. I felt called. And it's funny. People are like, you gonna write another one? I'm like, I don't hear the muse right now. I'm tired. So we'll talk about what's in the book.
I started reading your book and I'm going to finish it. And it's the perfect gift to give to graduating PR pros. I have someone in mind that I'm going to send it to. I can't wait to finish reading it, but it really, you just spoke to my soul. Like, even like going to the career services center and trying to figure out careers, like, oh, it's just, so anyway, I love hearing how you were inspired to write, like what inspired you to do it. You wanted to share that insight. I think it's wonderful. I can't tell you how many journalists move into, move into PR and then are just like shell shocked when they discover what the work actually is. And that is way more than media relations. I talk all the time about breaking out of that PR equals media box, because we are meant for so much more. You said you're creative. We're very creative people. I think we're naturally empathetic people. We're naturally curious people. And I also believe that we have naturally strategic brains, but we just aren't empowered to use it. And so the work that I do and the talks I do with PR people is all to empower them to like realize that we're meant for so much more. And if we lean into these beautiful frameworks available to us, it just allows us to have they allow us to have so much more impact with our work.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, in that spirit, Jennifer, what advice do you have for any PR or communications professionals who might be interested in exploring a career evolution? Or I kind of feel around my age, there's a lot of chatter about, well, what's next, or second career options. So what advice do you have?
I think it's important to continue to develop professionally. I think it's important there are a couple of things that I ask people to do when they're trying to decide about a career or what they want to do in PR. I ask them to create a few different lists. What is it that you absolutely love to do? What are the skills that you believe you have that are just out of this world and that you could offer to an organization, a company, a nonprofit, wherever you think you want to. And then that third list is where research the organizations where you feel you could marry those two things, and the answers come from that. I think doing that kind of introspection allows you to, and at the same time recognizing, okay, that we got to eat and we have to pay the bills, but even as you're doing that, not taking the first thing that's available to you, which you will not do if you've taken the time to think through what it is you really want. I think that as I reflect on my own career, I realized that even in my 20s, I was very intentional and thoughtful about the next steps, but I always made sure that I was paying my bills at the same time and finding opportunities where I was. Like in the reservations department, who knew that there was a video production department? Who knew that the managing director was going to come and ask me to write his column for the employee newsletter? Finding opportunities where you are can also be incredibly valuable. And then I also like to remind people that everything counts. You said earlier that you have some regret about being at this private school, and I had some regrets as well about being at this private school that landed me with like $50,000 in debt after college. It took me
that's the only regret, y'all.
10 years to pay off. However, everything counts. Like I speak Spanish because of that experience. I have I have had some scary and awful professional experiences, but have learned from them as well. And so recognizing that everything counts, figuring out what your unique skills and qualities are that you can bring to a profession, and then professional development training, joining a public relations professional association like PRSA, Here in Florida, we've got FPRA. There are a number of different organizations, and just continuing to find ways to enhance your skills and your knowledge and abilities so that you feel confident in situations. And most importantly, like learning RPI, like really, like learning RPI, learning research planning, implementation, evaluation, that strategic communications planning framework, so that you are not boxed in to media relations. So that if you love media and that is what you want to do, then great. But recognize that we have so much more to offer organizations. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, Melissa, like who is it that is uniquely situated in a company to be able to hold leaders accountable, to be able to hold us accountable to our core values, to ensure that we're listening to the different people in the organization, neurodivergent, ethnicity, gender, who is uniquely situated to do that? And I can't think of anyone besides the communications person. Marketing is selling, legal's keeping the company out of trouble, HR is hiring, finance is managing the finances. We are uniquely situated for that role, to be doing that environmental scanning, understanding what's happening in the world around us and how it impacts our organizations, knowing how employees are feeling about the brand, knowing how all of our different internal and external stakeholders are perceiving the brand. What are the appropriate messages for all of those key stakeholders? I'm kind of on a soapbox now, but that's I just really believe in the work that we do and truly believe that we're meant for so much more. I'm going to be talking about it this month. Actually, I'm doing a keynote at PRSA SunCon, our regional conference here in South Florida. And I'll be talking about all of these issues, that we are just meant for so much more, and leaning into frameworks is what I believe gives us the power and the confidence to really be all that we can be as communications professionals.
Yeah, I love that, because the frameworks for me was, well, what's the next step? What do I do from here? And so it's great to have that structure, because that's infrastructure on what you do. And actually, so for those, especially if you're studying for your accreditation in PR, I have a chapter about planning. And I'll talk about the RPI there and break it all down and just people speak, right? But I use it. I even talk about how I used it to lose 100 pounds, as we talked about offline, Jennifer. I've used like just the planning and how's it going, and actually taking action, right? Because a lot of us have a plan, but we never actually walk through it and bring it to life. So I underline everything you're saying. Jennifer, I know we could go on forever, but I'll wrap it up for the sake of our listeners. So I want to ask you, what does smart talk mean to you?
I love that question. Smart talk to me is conversation that is empathetic, it is authentic, it is not just two-directional, it's multi-directional. It's recognizing that there are different opinions, ideas, points of view, and it's talk that's open as well, and that offers grace to all of the people involved in the conversation.
I love it. That was a great way to summarize smart talk. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Jennifer, I enjoyed our conversation. I know our listeners did as well. So what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Oh man, I'm kind of everywhere. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Jen R. Hudson is my handle on LinkedIn. I'm one of those old-fashioned folks who's still private, so reach out to me and say you heard me on Smart Talk, and I will accept you right away.
I think that's smart.
Yeah, I'm also on Instagram, Think Beyond PR, ThinkBeyond PR. I'm on Facebook, Think Beyond PR, and email as well is wonderful, jen@wethinkbeyond.com. And those are the primary ways to connect with me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. This has been awesome. I appreciate you so much.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. You can work with me as a trainer, consultant, or hire my firm, MVW Communications, for strategic planning or PR strategy services. In case you missed it, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know is out. You can buy your print or audiobook copy to get award-winning advice, lessons, and tools about all things public relations. Available on Amazon or get an autographed copy at mvw360.com/book. Grab your copy there and please leave us a review. It would mean the world to me and helps more aspiring or working professionals find us. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.